We're going to, thank you, Nikki. As you can see, the meeting's being recorded. Thank you for joining us for our first meeting of 2022. We're so glad that you're here to join us tonight. We're so pleased to have shortly a mental health panel with 3 experts, actually 4 experts joining us, and we're very pleased to have them here to talk about a very important topic, the mental health of our students. So we'll be turning to that very shortly. Before we get to that, we have a few other things that we want to touch base on, and then we'll move into the mental health panel. So, so I did want to review our March to May meetings. We have presentations scheduled for all 3 meetings coming up. Those 3 topics are going to be on college. First up in March, and that's going to be the March 15th meeting. We have Potomac Oaks Tutoring, and we're very pleased to have them join us. They offer our mock SAT and ACT testing as well. And they do a great presentation, and it's about the progression. Actually, I'm blocking my view here. Progression of high school from 9th grade through college applications. And then next up for our April meeting, we're pleased to have Jody Glau and Andrea Malkin-Brenner will be joining us. They're independent college counselors, and they'll be talking about beginning to build critical adulting skills in high school. And they wrote an excellent book, and they have a lot of great information to share. And then finally in May, our May meeting will be a packed meeting. That's when we hold PTSA elections. We'll be talking about the Wootton Summer Institute and all the great courses and college preparation activities that happen over the summer at Wootton. And then we will have a guest, Amy Smith from Power Hour Editing. We'll be talking about how to find and communicate your wow factor in your college essays and activity list. And it's perfect timing because our seniors will be working on their college, our rising seniors will be working on their college applications over the summertime. So it would be a good time to have that topic. So we hope you can join us for all 3 of those meetings. If you're not able to attend, we do record each of our meetings so that you can watch it on demand at your convenience. And let's move to the next slide. Oh, next slide. So I did want to give you one more update, and before I turn it over, the city of Rockville has been a very big supporter of the schools that are based in the city limits, including Wootton. We work with them quite a bit. They ended up putting a light at the crosswalk right outside of Wootton. We worked for some time to get them to do that, and they've been talking for the past couple of years about setting up an education commission, and the goal of that is to help to formally collaborate with all these schools and to support the schools and to help to advocate for the needs of the schools that fall within the city limits. So there's going to be a vote coming up on February 28th. It's going to be before the mayor and the city council. So if you, if it's something that you think would be a good idea, please feel free to write the mayor and the city council members, and I will provide information. We'll post it and make sure that you have access to it so that you're able to share your thoughts if you think that the Education Commission would be a good idea. And before we turn it over to Ms. Bolden, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nkem Okeke to talk about Black History Month. Do we have Nkem on?
I don't think she's on right now, Brian.
Oh, she's not on yet? Okay, so
Okay.
then let's turn it over to Ms. Bolden and we'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Rabin. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. It is so great to join you this evening. This is my first meeting back after spending some time at Rachel Carson Elementary School over the past 7 weeks or so. And it was a wonderful experience However, there's no place like home. So I'm very excited to be back and really be able to join for this important topic this evening. As you know, that we've talked a lot about mental health and how our children are doing in light of all of their most recent experiences. So I first want to thank the PTSA and our panelists for being here and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and your expertise. So thank you so much for hosting this really important evening. I'm not going to speak too long, but I want to just say for our senior parents out there, class of 2022, we're heading into home stretch and I'm very excited. We're starting to get to the celebrations of the senior year. And so our senior leadership has been working really hard to make sure that we're doing some fun things in school, but also to look forward to some of those traditions that they look forward to in their second semester, including their picnic and their prom and graduation, award ceremony. So we're really gearing up for all of these traditions that we've had to reimagine in other ways in the past 2 years. So you'll be getting more information regarding all of the events that seniors are involved in. And we appreciate your experience in those and enjoying those with your seniors. For our juniors, they are well underway of planning for their junior banquet. We're going to bring that back. It will be a local junior banquet. We're not going to be able to go to a hotel, but we'll do something at Wootton, and they have big ideas. And so we're meeting now to finalize their plans for that. So we're also excited for them. And there's the balance in junior year. It's a challenging year for them as well. So our counselors are gearing up for their red folder meetings where we begin the college process and formally explaining to them what that process looks like from our end. And so again, I appreciate the PTSA's support as they are planning activities that would be appropriate for our juniors as well. And for our freshmen and sophomores, I don't want to leave them out. We're continuing to have them reacclimate to school. They are doing very well in school and trying to find their footing. And so we're continuing to support them. They've done some fundraisers and they've done some other class activities. But overall, I think that we're continuing to navigate this challenge of a year. And I really appreciate all of your support with our kids in trying to make sure that their well-being is first and foremost as we move forward. Also, just like to thank the PTSA for our Valentine's treat. I'd like to thank for PTSA for all of your continued support. And yes, this month, we are so excited that we will have our Black History Month program on Thursday, February 24th at 6:30 p.m. It is a virtual event. And so I will be sending out the link in my community letter on Sunday so that everyone can come and take part of that. And we also are extending an opportunity for study circles. Many of you may know that we have been doing study circles, which is a structured dialogue about race and community and relationships in our school for the past 7 years, and our students and staff have participated in that, and we want to extend it out to parents. And so you will see there was a community message that went out last week asking for parents if they would like to be part of a study circle, and we'll explain more what that study circle experience is, and ask for parent participation. We would love to get your voice in our conversations that we've been having, and that's been a voice that we wanted to elevate for some time. And so I'll send out again another message there and how you can sign up and get more information about study circles. And so with that, I will just say that there has been a lot that's been happening at Wootton, and I so appreciate all of your continued support and your partnership in that. And I look forward very much to this evening's discussion. And thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Rabin.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. As you can see up on the screen right now, please join Ms. Bolden this Friday at 9 a.m. to talk about, to have our next coffee chat. And that's a virtual coffee chat. You can find the Zoom link up on the Wootton PTSA website. And please, please join. It's a great opportunity for a great conversation with Ms. Bolden. And I do want to mention that we are looking for a bus coordinator for graduation. Graduation will be taking place at DAR Constitution Hall. And we do need, PTSA has provided the buses for many years. Of course, we haven't for the past 2 years, but we need to do that again. So we would like to find a bus coordinator. So if anyone is interested, please contact me. And you can find me on the Wootton PTSA website, and we'd be pleased to have you volunteer. So thank you so much. Before we move on, are there any questions? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'd like to introduce Dr. Shruti Japee, who's a senior associate scientist at the National Institute of Mental Health at NIH, where she conducts cognitive neuroscience research on how the human brain processes facial and body expressions. She has 2 boys, one is sophomore at Wootton, and the other one is a 7th grader at Cabin John. Dr. Japee.
Thank you so much, Brian. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Awesome. Well, this is my privilege today to help facilitate this really discussion. And I want to make sure that we have our panelists, because we're starting just slightly earlier than we had anticipated. I just want to make sure we have our 3 panelists. I see Dr. Tien. Thank you for joining us. I also see Dr. Jagani. Hi, thank you for joining. Hi. And I think I'm looking for Dr. Raza. If she will be joining momentarily. So we'll give her another minute. In the meantime, I'd like to just go ahead and introduce our expert panel today. We're lucky to have 3 people whose bread and butter is mental health of adults, of adolescents, and kids with special needs. So I'll start with introductions first. If we could actually pin, is it possible, Nikki, is it possible to pin the panelists at the top, or are they already?
I can if you want at the top instead of next to you.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just want to make sure that everybody can see them. That's all. Yeah. Okay. So my first order of business is to introduce our panelists, and I'll start with Dr. Jagani. She's a board certified physician with more than 20 years of experience providing care in a variety of healthcare settings, including inpatient, outpatient, and even to newborns. And relevant for today, she has a special interest in taking care of adolescents and kids with special needs and those with behavioral issues. And she listens carefully to children's and parents' concerns. And this is really important and will be useful for today's discussion. And Dr. Jagani recently relocated to this area from Texas, so welcome. And she's currently working as a pediatrician at Abdow Friendship Pediatrics in Rockville. So welcome, Dr. Jagani. Would you like to add anything at all?
No, I think you said quite a lot about me. Thank you so much. It's my first couple of months in Maryland, from Texas. So it's a change, especially the weather, but it's been a lot of fun, working with teenagers and adolescents over here. Thank you.
Fantastic. So welcome. Thank you. Okay, it is my intense pleasure to actually introduce a colleague of mine at NIMH, Dr. Haniya Raza. She is a board certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. So she's a 3-in-1, and she's currently serves as the chief of service for the Psychiatry Consultation Liaison Service at NIMH. And she's involved currently in a variety of studies, including looking at the mental health consequences of COVID-19 infection, and also psychiatric phenotyping of rare genetic diseases. And her research and expertise all relate to psychiatric disorders presenting in children, adolescents, like the ones we're going to be talking about today, and those with developmental disabilities and other complex medical illnesses. So thank you, Dr. Raza, for joining. Really appreciate you being here. Would you like to add anything at all?
No, that's good.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're grateful for the time you've given us. All right, and last but not least, we have Dr. Alan Tien. I hope I'm pronouncing everybody's names right. He's also a physician, but currently serving as president and CSO, so Chief Science Officer at Medical Decision Logic, which is MD Logics, and it's a company he founded back in 1998 to bring science and medical practice together in a way that helps essentially community health, help improve community health. And his goal is to integrate mental health programs, the clinical side using clinical services, and also including the science, so that the the common man can benefit from this in the community setting. So his company's software, which is called BHWorks, is being actually used by Prince George's County Public Schools, I believe. And this is, I guess they're using it to help monitor and screen students for mental health conditions so as to achieve early intervention and treatment. So welcome, Dr. Tien. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I was a faculty at Johns Hopkins for a while and did get significant support from NIMH. So thank you and your colleagues for funding my research back then. And I just got kind of frustrated with how long it took for research results to get into practice. And in the 90s, I was moonlighting at various Hopkins and hospitals and clinics around Baltimore, and saw this huge gap between the knowledge that a university or institute like NIH creates and what people are doing out in the communities. So I thought, okay, we can solve that with software. And I thought it would take 5 years in 1998, but we have kind of stuck to it. So it's actually now happening. PG County Public Schools is using our BHWorks for comprehensive screening, both teacher ratings of kids and self-report ratings of kids, about themselves, and then making sure that if there's an issue, that they get reliably referred into services, and we track, the processes and the outcomes at the individual student level. But that also creates really important de-identified population data that we can look at to understand better, where there are still issues and gaps and what policies are working and so forth. So it's starting to happen after 24 years, and I'm really honored to be invited to talk at this meeting.
That's great. Thank you. That was great. I just want to invite parents to, if you have anything on your mind you want to talk about today with our expert panelists, please put it in the chat, or you could raise your hand and we can call out so you can unmute and ask questions. So just to get us started, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that we are getting to the start of the third year of the pandemic. And I would, if you had asked me 2 years ago how long this would last, I would be like, 6 months and we'll be out of it. So clearly we're all still dealing with it. And along with it comes the mental health challenge that our kids are facing. And this, is due to, we're sort of being back in school is a huge step forward, and being consistently back in school is great. But there are still disruptions to their activities and social interactions and things. So I just want to hear from any of you, all of you panelists, about, given that we've been through this now for 2 years, a lot of us, are still considering looking for signs of depression or anxiety and things like that in our kids. So would you just kind of wrap up for us, kind of just highlight what are the things that parents should have foremost on their minds in terms of warning signs? So maybe we start there and then we can talk more details. So maybe just general guidelines for parents. Anybody want to jump in and get us started?
I think I can start with this, being a general pediatrician in general practice. And what we've seen over the period of these last 2.5 to 3 years, in whether it was Texas or in Maryland that I'm seeing now, some of the red flags that as parents we have to be aware of is that, our children are going through a lot of social isolation at this time. I mean, they were used to going, with their friends, hanging out, going to the mall, going to the sports, to events, and everything suddenly, came to a full stop for them. So for them to be able to handle this situation has become really difficult. And things are getting a little better now, but last year was a pretty rough year for a lot of parents, for us as pediatricians. And we were constantly on the lookout for doctors like Dr. Raza to send them, for counseling and to think whether we need medications. So what I say is things to look out for, of course. First of all, keep your channels of communication open with your children. Make sure that they are your best friends. They can come and talk to you about anything. If you see a change in their mood, their demeanor, the way they are, they're sleeping too much, or they're not sleeping at all, they're eating or they're not eating, they're losing weight, they don't want to do the things that you were happily doing, or, meeting, calling up people and talking to them, because, these are the things to be aware of. That means that somewhere down the road, this social isolation has affected them in a way that now they're going towards either depression or anxiety. They're anxious of being around people now because, this phobia of constantly being scared. We were going through a time when we were wiping down things and not touching anything. So slowly and slowly, those things were telling. And every time in the clinic, you would see them and they would tell you this: I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen next. Will I get to see my friends? So some of the red flags parents can, help look and see any change in your child. They're spending more time in their rooms. They don't want to come and sit down as a family. They're not eating together. So one thing is that communication is very important. Talk to them. Just don't let them say, oh, I'm doing okay. How was your day, my son? Oh, it was fine. No, just ask them, how was the game? How was the sport? How was your science or your chemistry class? Or something specific, so that they know that, okay, now, I can talk. I can start talking to my parents. Don't judge them. Be their best friend. Okay. Dr. Raza, maybe she can add some more.
Yeah, I was gonna invite.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think that was said very nicely. I think for teenagers, there are different signs of depression, and sometimes it's feeling sad and lonely, but other times it could also be a lot of anger and irritability, which sometimes gets missed. You see a child or a teen that is, just snapping a lot, irritable, don't talk to me, slamming doors. And sometimes that is not a sign of just, an angry kid or a disrespectful kid. It's a sign that perhaps there's something happening in their mood states. And so that's one thing I always tell the parents that I work with, is just to be aware of fluctuations and changes in their mood states. I think those points about sleeping pattern changes, eating pattern changes, those are also fairly typical signs of depression in kids. Another thing is kids report feeling lonely, and they sometimes might report feeling misunderstood, or they feel misunderstood. The other thing to understand about depression is that it's typically seen as an internalizing condition. And so people tend to go inward when they're depressed. They might not come to you and say, hey, mom, I've been increasingly depressed over the last 3 months. Most kids won't do that. They just sort of retreat inward and they keep saying they're fine. And so some parents will say, okay, well, they're saying they're fine. I don't want to probe. I don't want to annoy her further, or I don't want to make him more angry, so I'm just going to let it go. But if you're seeing a lot of time spent in the room with the door shut, being withdrawn, not wanting to come out in other parts of the house and interact with the family, and then some of these changes in their mood patterns, that sometimes is giving us a sense of depression. When they actually start losing interest in things, where they were really into soccer at one point, or they were really into their art, or things like that, and they slowly start losing interest, that's sometimes an indicator that this mood thing has been going on for a while, and now it's gotten to the point where they've even lost interest in things that they used to like. So these are some of the signs. Sometimes engaging in substance use, that can be the result of possible depression, where then they try to make themselves feel better and might resort to using substances. Or you see a change in pattern with more substance use or something. You're seeing a shift and a change in their demeanor and the way that they typically will behave.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just really quickly ask, as the mom of almost now 2 teenagers, you know, we know that there are going to be mood swings, and we know that they can be irritable. It's all part of the package, you know, for those few years. And I guess the things that you mentioned, so I guess the difference between the normal tumultuous teenagers versus deeper signs of depression, anxiety would be this more consistent pattern, right? Like where
That's
you're
exactly
seeing-
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're all of us in this meeting, we are all susceptible and prone to having a bad day.
Yeah.
And we can be grouchy and irritable, and we might, you know, yell at our spouse or yell at our kids. And we're all susceptible to that. But if you are seeing a sustained day after day where nothing really seems to improve or brighten them up, then that's where I would start worrying about it, and maybe bringing it to your pediatrician's attention, or sometimes before you even bring it to the doctor's attention, you might want to start probing with them and just kind of seeing in a non-judgmental way, what is their inner state like?
Okay. Do you have tips, a few tips for parents as to how to start that conversation? Because as you said, they're probably in their rooms with the door slammed. So, I mean, this is kind of now going into, you know, more like counseling and things, but I'm just wondering, it's like, how are a couple of hooks that parents can use to kind of gauge whether, okay, this is just the regular kind of mood swing, but I want to probe further and see if this is anything I should worry about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to take that? Anyone else want to?
Yeah, please. I mean, it's an open panel. Like, if you feel like you can help, you know, advise, please jump in. Dr. Jagani, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I mean, what I would suggest is the way we tell our parents and we talk to them is try to have, like, if not every day, at least a couple of times a week, a family time, you know. Try to have some meals together. I know we are all so busy and all doing things, different things at all different times with games and sports and all. This was a good opportunity for all of us to sit together and, you know, try to talk to them. And then that's how you can gauge and see whether this is something which is ongoing, that, you know, this is not just a fluke or a bad day that they're having. It's something that is ongoing, that they really do want to take part in the activities they were doing. They really are spending too much time in their room. So that kind of gives you a clue. And what we try to do is, of course, I mean, as parents, we talk to them. But then, of course, you can try to get some help. You can go for like a general checkup to your pediatrician and just talk to them. What we try to do at our offices are we talk one-on-one with the children, with the teenagers. We talk to the parents, we listen to everything. Then, you know, we ask the parents to take a seat outside and we talk to them. We have, I'm sure Dr. Raza and Dr. Allen are doing the PHQ 9 to 17 forms. We go through those with them. Let them tell us, you know, and then ask them, you know, is there something that is, you know, going on? They do tell you, because it's affecting their grades. It's affecting their self-esteem also at that time. So they do try and open up to us. And if we, as you know, we can try to get a dialogue between the parents and the children, that's the best way to go. And then if at that time we feel that, you know, no, I think we need a little more help, and then, you know, we start looking for someone for some kind of counseling. But I think sitting down, interacting with them, seeing the data, you know, if you see personal hygiene deteriorating to an extent that is not that child of yours. If you find that really he's not taking care or she's not taking care of herself like she used to, then there's something definitely deeper going on than rather than just, you know, mood swings because of, you know, hormones or something else like that.
Yeah, I fully agree with the keeping the communication going. That's fundamental. And so then in thinking about communication, then you start thinking, well, what does that entail? What is the concepts and the vocabulary? What words, you know, can we use to communicate with ourselves actually and with our children? So there's a whole bunch of things, and I could probably spend hours talking about things, but you know, in a practical way, it's important to recognize that psychiatry and NIMH, we still don't really understand exactly what depression is or anxiety. We're still trying to figure that out in terms of brain systems and psychological patterns and so forth. But it's pretty clear, I think everyone would agree to some extent, anxiety and depression really overlap a lot. So if you're concerned about depression, you really pay attention to anxiety, and definitely irritability and anger is part of that kind of set of things. I would emphasize underscore, yeah, any change in your teenage child's or younger behavior, any change is worth paying attention to and just asking about. And so when asking, and whether you do it daily, I mean, every day, 5 minutes or dinner time together, which isn't practical, and now for a lot of people, that's a great time if you have that time just to find out. And you can actually think about being empathic. You know, empathy means you understand your child's situation well enough that you can describe it to them and they say, yeah, that's what's going on with me. If you can get to that point, then you can really make sure that if there are new things happening that are problems, you can talk about them. And it's kind of like prevention. I mean, depression requires, you know, officially 2 weeks, right, of symptoms. Yeah. But so one day it's not depression, but one day of someone being pretty upset is really important to talk about, right? So it doesn't become 2 days or get buried inside and go on longer. So these are really warning signs to pay attention to. You know, when I was in med school and other people said, if you think you smell something stuck on the bottom of your shoe, it's probably there. So just be, you know, our brains are we're as parents especially, we're very sensitive to our kids' state. But so we may sense something is not right, but we may not know what to say or how to talk about it. So that's a place to learn. And, you know, beyond just having a good conversation in that time, and obviously you have to manage yourself. You can't yell at your kids and expect them to talk to you. But motivational interviewing is actually pretty easy. I mean, it's kind of hard to remember it all, but you can actually learn how to do motivational interviewing online and just practice that. And it's asking open-ended questions and then confirming. And so that's a great way to kind of structure the conversation. And I would say from the school perspective, and I'm so glad to hear you using PHQ-9 and so forth, right, to screen your patients. But, you know, that's what we began our focus on in 2005, actually, with folks at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and across Pennsylvania to develop and validate a comprehensive screening tool that we validated. And that's, you know, the behavioral health screen is part of our software. So that does a great job. The pediatricians that use it in Philadelphia, they tell me now they don't have to spend time asking the questions. The kids actually ask them, are you going to repeat the test? I want to let you know how I'm doing. And they have everything scored, quantified. Depression severity is marked if it's there. They can use it for managing treatment, medication adjustment. So it's something that we are doing in schools across Pennsylvania and Michigan. We definitely want to do it in Maryland. Maybe we can expand with Montgomery County or even just one school. We're here to do that. So that's really taking advantage of all the decades of work that NIH have supported to develop measurement tools, right? And they really work. It's like if you didn't have a machine, if you're a doctor and you don't have a blood pressure machine, how are you going to measure blood pressure? If you didn't measure blood pressure, that would be kind of not the right thing to do. So now there are tools with which to measure depression, anxiety, trauma, suicide. It's important to ask about suicide thoughts too. Don't be afraid to ask if you're concerned, because kids will tell you, and they're happy. They're not happy, but they're very willing to talk about it if they get asked.
Fantastic. There were lots of nuggets in there that I just want to kind of pick up on and reiterate so that parents on the call can kind of also take home with them. So one thing that you mentioned was motivational interviewing, which I'm going to look up so that I can use it. And I think that sounds like a good tool to kind of probe and see how things are going. If nothing, to get a baseline, right? I think that's also important. And then the other thing I would like to pick up on is, since you have been doing this in Prince George's County, which is our neighboring district, and I suspect that what's happening there is similar to what's happening here in Montgomery County. So I'm just wondering, like, I don't know how much data you have collected, if there's stuff that you can talk about, but what is the general sense? Like, how are kids doing?
So we're just going into operation with them. We they contracted with us last October. And so we went through, onboarding and configuring and training process. It's more complicated there than in some other places because they have 9 different behavioral health providers that they contract with to provide services. So that includes Shepherd Pratt and 8 others. So they were all doing their own different thing. So we spent several months to talk in detail with all of them and get them all to come up with a standard way to do this, a standard process for assessment and referral, and then tracking, the results of that. So that's supposed to start next week. They may delay it, who knows, for another week or two, but we think it'll be very soon. But we've been screening kids in high schools and middle schools across Pennsylvania since 2014. So maybe 140,000 or more kids have been screened, and another 30 or 40,000 in the CHOP emergency department. So we saw really clearly, when COVID kicked in, huge increases in the prevalence of anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts, 40 or 50% increases, right? Within the first 4 or 5 months, 2020, right? So, but actually, as you all know, researchers, there were less suicides actually in this country during that time, maybe because of the isolation, I'm not really sure, who knows, but that's really worrisome. There's still, I think, pent up risk. And actually, deaths from drug overdoses, opioids being one of the main ones, to me, they're actually similar to deaths from suicide because there's similar problems that underlie them and they overlap again. So we saw a huge increase in overdose deaths from opioids last year, like 92,000 people died. And that may be an undercount because sometimes the coroners don't say it's opioid when they call it heart failure and things like that, right? So big problems in our population. But at the same time, when we screen kids and identify the problems, they will answer the questions and then get them into treatment. It really works. I think we referred 30, 40,000 kids in Pennsylvania from schools into what's called SAP agencies, student assistance program providers. And we've seen, really like good tears from parents, right? That finally, I know what's going on with my son or daughter and they're getting the help that they need. So it really works. In Michigan, we started last May, and Michigan Department of Education, in spite of all the political turmoil we see in various states, Michigan has their act together when it comes to student mental health. And they're doing these statewide things to really improve identification of kids at risk and then get them referred into treatment. And then again, look for variation of that, make sure that there's any gaps or that no one drops the ball, that doesn't happen more than once or twice. So starting in September, I think there's been about over 4,000 kids referred into treatment in Pennsylvania because of screening them. So we'll have results from PG County over the next few months. Now, we don't always have to be careful because this data is confidential.
Of course, yeah.
And so, but if it's de-identified and a large enough number of cases, then we can, and still the schools agree, then it can be shared.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Raza and Dr. Jagani, in practice, since you are front facing and talking to parents, talking to kids, what has been let's say in the past year, probably what you've encountered in the past year has been a little different from the first year, I'm guessing. Is that true? Are we seeing slightly different things now that kids are back in school? Like what are the major things that you are seeing on the street, so to speak? Dr. Jagani, you want to start?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Things were pretty bad. In 2020, I think it was, nobody understood exactly what was going on. So, things were being taken in a stride. As you said, we thought it would be over in 6 months and, we're just going to be staying home for a while and, we're going to go virtual. And it was little excitement was there. But then as it just went on getting prolonged, we saw intense amount of anxiety setting up, of not getting to meet friends, families talking about staying in a little bubble, just meeting a couple of people. There were no tests available. So things have changed since then to now with, the rapid testing being available. Like, you have a little get together, you make sure everybody gets a little test and comes there. So I think it's helping. Things are getting a little better. Dr. Raza may be able to, explain this better, because I'm sure she's getting less referrals from all of us. Like we were going, it was unbelievable how difficult it was to get hold of a therapist, a counselor, or a psych, And as general pediatricians, we do treat a little bit, but I prefer always to get the expertise involved with it. So I think things are settling down, and I think parents also, as parents, we are letting our children, let's make sure first of all vaccinated. I mean, I'm a big believer of that, and I really advocate that. So, it's rather be safe than sorry. And so get vaccinated. And then, they started moving out now. They're meeting friends, having, get-togethers, being safe, do outdoor things. So I think things are getting a little better. And I think, at least in my practice, I'm seeing a little less referrals than what I was doing, you can say about 6 months back, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Raza, how about you?
Yeah, I would, this pandemic has been such an, it's hard to keep track of it. It's hard to keep your finger on what is going on, because things are widely shifting. We rely on the media often to give us information about what's happening. And just when you think things are getting better and the schools are going to open, and the vaccine is out, then we find out that, well, it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated and you have the booster, you can still get it, because guess what? The new one is much more transmissible than the old variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So it's been really hard to keep track. I think overall, as Alan said, it's just been a very devastating for the young people. It has been declared a mental health emergency. I think a lot of kids, it really depends on the makeup of the family, the level of support systems that are in place for kids. It matters if, a lot of kids know somebody very close to them who died, and that's very traumatic. And now a lot of kids weren't able to go to funerals. We had to have these weird Zoom, live face streaming funeral type things. And so it's been highly traumatic, I think, for kids to constantly have to swallow and take in this new information. And even if something didn't hit them directly, they might have a friend or know somebody who dealt with a very traumatic aspect of COVID. And so I think the consequences are going to be pretty far reaching. I don't want to be bleak, but when a society goes through something like this, even when we have some level of resilience, I do think, the kids sort of have a different worldview, that these kinds of things can happen. Weird viruses where we don't know where they come from can just jump into the community, and they're living through a pandemic. So I think it leaves kids at risk, certainly for anxiety and depression, in the sense where the world has become somewhat of an uncertain place. And so what are things that we can do? So when you ask, what have I seen in my practice and in my work, social anxiety, as Dr. Jagani said, that's a big one. I think even for adults, for all of us, we got so used to hunkering down in our homes and wearing casual clothes and not having to deal with the outside world. You get really good at that, particularly people who tend to be introverted. At least in the beginning. And so social anxiety is a big one, where kids are now going back to school. I wonder about the kids who were freshmen when COVID happened, and they really got started in high school, and then they had to leave. And then practically all of sophomore year, they are, at home, maybe kind of going back towards the end of sophomore year. And then now they come back to school as juniors, which are upperclassmen. They're hitting the grind for the college stuff. Yeah. And they don't even know who the freshmen and sophomores are, because it's just a really weird place for some of these kids. And for our middle school kids, our younger high school kids, if you put yourself in their shoes, talk about being empathic and trying to understand their worldview. These are kids who went into pandemic in 7th and 8th grade years. They didn't really get to have that sort of process through middle school where they could have their 8th grade graduation. Some of them might have gotten it. And now all of a sudden being out of school and being thrust into high school. And now you're in this big building, you're in school with 18-year-olds. What must that feel like? So if you really sit down and try to understand the experience of the kids, they are going through a lot. And we do rely on the fact that that most kids are resilient. They do feel very supported by their friends, even if now we can't really see our friends' faces. You can see their eyes, you walk by, you recognize people in the halls. It's just nice for them to be together, for many of them. For our very socially anxious, sort of more isolated kids, it might be a little bit anxiety provoking to have to come back into it. Teachers are being told, one of the ways that we handle with this is we try to go back to usual. We don't try to thin out the work. We give them as much academic load as they're supposed to have. We try to go back to normal, like a normal junior year curriculum, and the kids might be a little bit rusty. And so they're going to need time to adjust back. So all of these things the kids are going through. And these are the things that I'm seeing when I talk to kids about this. It's really hard. And, one of it's an adolescent girl who said that when she came back to school, one of the things that she found really weird is she couldn't tell if people were smiling at her or frowning at her. She could just see them looking at her. Right. And she said it's really weird to walk through the halls and not know if someone, because normally you could walk by, see someone and just do a quick smile. Yeah. And you can't tell in a mask what somebody's, maybe you can read their eyes. So kids have reflected these things back, and it's quite an experience for them to go through this. So anxiety is a big one. I think that I would say anxiety is probably the biggest thing we're seeing. Different, and anxiety comes in 100 different flavors. Oh. Anxiety, just more worry about their future, more worry about the world, worry about their parents. Kids worry about the safety of their parents, less so about themselves. It's developmentally very normal for kids to think they're just going to be fine, but they worry about their dad or they worry about their mom.
Right.
And so these are the things that we're seeing. And these are the sort of things that we target treatment towards.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. I just want to take a second to remind parents that if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand or unmute and feel free to ask. So I have actually heard from a lot of parents that during the past couple of years, their teenagers have kind of have been using social media more because they're missing out on the actual social interactions. They're not seeing their friends. And so there has definitely been an increase, at least in my parent circle, that with social media use. And that, as we know, comes with its own set of problems and has been linked to increased depression and things. So are there strategies that we can use as parents? Because this is, whether we want to accept it or not, one way that they do communicate with each other. And this is kind of their way. And how are there strategies that you as pediatricians and psychiatrists, therapists, kind of provide to parents? Like what strategies can we use to walk that fine line between, no, you can't do this, or you're doing this too much, versus having them isolated? I know it's a tough one, but I'll just
I didn't talk about social media to them. You start with the problem. What has happened is, because of being virtual and constantly, having to use their computers, their iPads, you cannot just, stop them from completely using it. But a couple of strategies I've talked to them, which I've tried at home also, have worked sometimes and have not worked all the time, is that keep a few times of the day where, you should have, even us as parents, should not be using our social media or not be using our phones or looking at them all the time. And especially if you can make meal times or a time to be together, or certain, I think it works better in middle schoolers because they still listen to you a little bit. But teenagers and all, it's always, oh, we still have our homework to do, or we still have the assignment to, take care of. But at least if you can make sure that for a certain time period, everybody, sits together, it had become so uncanny before the pandemic started. We would go to a restaurant and you could see 4 people on a table, no communication. The parents all have on their phones, and the little ones were sitting with their, gadgets or whatever it is, You put a little one in the car seat now, there's an iPad right in front of them. So, look at them. The little ones who come to the well checkups to us, the thing that the parents distract them is right away they open the phone. So they've become conditioned to it. So we have to try as parents, if we can make a certain time, meal times, or a little time where we can sit together and try to, see how conversations can happen. Try to stay away from them. So at least at the well visits, I definitely talk to them that, and then at night time, try to finish your homework earlier than later. And keep your phones down for a while. Let's see, we can do without it. I mean, there were times we did, and all of us, I think I'm as guilty as everybody else. We always want to look at our WhatsApp message. I don't know how important it is. So try to it's difficult, but we try to talk about it and try to enforce it as much as you can. Take away. You can't snatch it from them. You can't say you're not going to. Like my husband used to say, let's turn the Wi-Fi off, and I said, oh my God, that doesn't make any sense. But at least try to talk about it, that let's keep an hour a day or our meal times without anybody having their phones or their iPads on, things around with them. I'm sure you
Yeah,
can add
it's hard, not a fully solvable problem, but at the same time, social media has a lot of benefits as well as potential harms. But I think, again, I agree with you, Azra, it's an extension of the more general issue of having a relationship with your child and spending time talking and doing things together. Maybe help them with their homework. And even if you don't know what they're doing, you can still help them, probably by helping them think about it and ask questions and discuss it. It is important, I think, to educate kids because they probably don't know, but if they post a naked picture, it's actually can be a federal offense. And sometimes things happen from that, which is really bad. So they just be really careful. They know about, some of the risks. And certainly there are, some harmful things out there. But I think the majority of social media is useful. Bullying is a big deal. So you should really try to make sure that if your son or daughter is on social media and being bullied, that they'll tell you about it and you can talk about it. And certainly if they're doing it to others, you need to really try to be aware of that and educate them about that. And there are many apps, actually, as everyone probably knows, that can actually help with depression and anxiety and providing peer support and so forth. So there's a lot of choices. It's probably worth, as a school community to kind of go through and collate some of that. Say, here's some apps we recommend and things like that. Actually, our work with Kansas, that reminds me. So in Kansas, they have been doing a SAMHSA project on student mental health in those counties where there was a disaster, right? So kids and families were traumatized by the disaster. So they have a lot of focus on just providing education and training materials for kids, for parents, for teachers. And they're all free, online kind of thing. So there's a lot of resources that can be used.
Okay, great. Awesome. I have a practical question that I got from a parent that I feel like I should throw out to you all to get some advice. So let's say we did find that of all the things that you're talking about today, the symptoms, the kind of indicators that yes, something is amiss and that we should seek help. As a parent, I mean, the first thing I would do is probably call my pediatrician, but I'm hearing also that actually right now it's really hard to find therapists or counselors or psychiatrists who are taking new clients or taking new patients. So is there any since you're on the other side of this, is there any practical advice? Is there really a shortage, and how do we navigate this?
Yeah, there really is a shortage, and that's a reason why earlier conversation, earlier intervention, family intervention, prevention is really important. But there is, a huge demand. Child psychiatrists are, they're just overloaded with wait lists. So that's an issue. But other people can help too. We've got counselors, social workers, psychologists. Again, making this part of the family culture and part of the school culture. Schools are doing this more and more. If you know the acronym MTSS, multi-tier system of support. So it's like universal interventions in the curriculum in schools, starting in early K, first grade, to teach kids about social emotional learning, teach them about relationships, teach them about how their brains function, teach them about their fight or flight system, their emotions, those things really work, right? There's a great intervention that my colleagues at Hopkins pioneered and studied and showed works, the good behavior game, starting in the fall of first grade. Good behavior game intervention was randomized to 9 or 10 schools across Baltimore City in 1985. And it was, something that's very practical for teachers to do in the classroom. And by the next spring, those kids were doing better in the classroom. By third grade, there was no difference, and we were all kind of depressed, like, oh, we have to do more work and all that. But by 7th grade, those kids were doing better. They got the intervention, good behavior game. And then I saw the 25-year follow-up data a few years ago. And the kids that had the intervention had half the rates of substance abuse and suicide attempts and being incarcerated and being in trouble, basically. So amazing, right? You cut the rate of those kind of problems by 50%. I mean, it does take 10, 20 years, but that's a huge thing is prevention. Takes time, but very worthwhile. And I just love pediatricians. They're my favorite other specialty besides psychiatry, because you guys do so much with kids and families. So just need to do more of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was an unfair question because I'm sure you all have your plates full and your patient lists are probably long and you don't have room, but I'm just thinking from a practical perspective. Let's say we did identify a problem. Would your advice be just start at the pediatrician and then, Haniya, would you?
I would add to that, yes, absolutely. Particularly if there's any concern about their safety, a real shift from what their normal would be, or if they're, abusing substances, or some certain things that we refer to as emergencies. So obviously, any kid who is having thoughts about wanting to hurt themselves or kill themselves, we take that extremely seriously. That's not one that I would just wait. Those are the kinds of things that you immediately seek medical attention. Hearing voices, seeing things. These are considered emergencies. But if you're at a point where you're waiting to be seen by somebody, let's say the therapists, which they do, they have long wait lists, really have confidence in yourself. I think that's really important for parents to trust themselves. You want to, this is going back to what are the things that you can do at home. This is going back to Alan's comments and Azra's comments about the communication and keeping those channels of communication open. It's really important to just to be able to reflect back to kids. This is what I'm seeing, and I wonder is there anything you want to talk about? I've noticed that you've been looking really sad to me, and I'm just concerned. And can we talk about that? And the conversation should not be about solving the problem necessarily at first. It should just be a non-judgmental, supportive listening. Tell me more about that. And as Alan said, you should gather so much information just by keep on asking them questions and listening, so that you can retell their inner experience. And that's really hard to do. But if you really learn how to communicate with your child without trying to solve the problem. And another big one that we all do is we tell people how they should or shouldn't feel. And what they should do, as opposed to just listening and accepting them where they are right now, and being able to have that ability to sit with a kid who's very sad and depressed, and resisting the urge to try to immediately tell them how they should feel. And well, if you just got up and called your friend, and well, if you would just do this, you might feel better. And you need to, so that kind of communication sometimes is not helpful. Sometimes you might just say, I need to go run an errand at the mall. Do you want to come? And then we can go get lunch, or, sort of that kind of a communication style. And just one thing that's really, really helpful for kids is to know that the grownups around them, parents, aunt or uncle, coach, teacher, that this person gets me. And if they can find even one or two people that get them and understand it without judgment, it can be so powerful and helpful. And they can have some sort of improvement. I think that these things are incredibly important, and to just think about that as you're dealing with kids, and give yourself credit, model model that kind of humility yourselves. And sometimes in a house where we talk about the emotions that we're feeling, if that's modeled for kids, that's okay to say that, and there's no judgment, there's nothing wrong with it, that can also be helpful. So for parents to do that, to talk in those emotional words.
As a conceptual framework to organize what you can do. Haniya, you actually said one of the components of motivational interviewing, which is to reflect back.
Yes. Yes.
And empathy is the foundation. So it's empathy, which takes time and conversation, non-judgmental, and then open-ended questions, reflect it back. Then there is kind of an assertive part, which might be after weeks of discussion, to point out inconsistencies in what your child may be thinking and saying or doing. But then the last part of MI is autonomy, because especially teenagers, they're in the business of becoming independent from you.
Right.
And so you have to support their autonomy, but they also don't have, the experience, and they're under a lot of stress. And so I have 3 sons. They all survived. They're 37, 32, and 30. But I remember they went through periods of time when, their teens and early 20s are just being very stressed about the state of the world, right? And just everything. So being patient, and I would say the more you can work with yourself as a human being, the more you can benefit your kids too.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I have I just got a request to ask another question, and this is, not really pandemic related, but this is more kind of reintegration of kids who who for whatever reason have had to be out of school for treatment of a disorder, say either depression, self-harm, and anxiety, you name it. So when they do return, this is kind of very different from what we're discussing, but when they come back to school, oftentimes, so they may be feeling better as part of their treatment, but coming back to school can be, again, anxiety provoking. And I guess the question really is, like, how do we bolster a kid who has just been through treatment, is trying to get reintegrated, but expects to be, friends are going to ask, where have you been? What have you been up to? Like that kind of thing. So I'm sure you walked kids and parents through these kinds of scenarios. Do you have any advice for parents who might be dealing with that?
Let me just start, preferably brief. In that return, that's one place where our systems drop the ball all the time. Kid comes back and no one really knows at the school what happened. So that's really important to try to make sure that there's awareness in the school that the child, was at psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks, and so that's critical, and that means probably coordinating with the pediatrician, potentially the therapist. Secondly, the issue of stigma is huge here, right? People just want to keep things hidden, and they're afraid or ashamed or anxious to talk about this. And you got to respect everyone's opinion, but I think these are topics, to bring up with your child, and then with their peers and with the school. Like, here's what happened, and so it's there's no easy answer to how to do that. But the more you can make progress in it being an open conversation and really minimize the stigma, it's going to be beneficial.
This is a topic I've worked with many families with, is how do you go back and what are you supposed to say and what should be kept a secret? And I think with high school kids, number one, whenever a kid is going back into the school system, back to school, I think it's really important to have a meeting before they return to school with the school team and decide, and you don't need to go into the nitty gritty of the details of what happened, but generally I think it is good to just share as much as the teen is comfortable sharing about what happened. And again, that is a personal decision, how much you would like to disclose or not disclose. And then have some sort of a meeting of what the parameters would be. I mean, we have this tendency to say, well, when they're done with their mental health treatment, or they've shifted now from a day treatment or inpatient or whatever, and they're going back to regular school, they have to just go in at a full schedule. And I personally, I take each case very sort of as a unique situation. And for some kids, it means returning to school on a reduced schedule, where perhaps they start at the regular time, they leave at 1 o'clock. And we do that for a week. And then, the second week we leave at 2 o'clock and we leave at 3. We set up a schedule. We're consistent, we're predictable, we don't disappoint the kid, and we tell them this is what we're going to do and we stick with it. And so sometimes a staggered return to school is what's helpful. With regards to what to tell your friends, that's a big one that I talk to kids about, and everyone is different. So I think it's really important to give attention to that before you go back to school, and sometimes sitting down together with parents or whoever and or with your therapist and coming up with the script. Sometimes having that script sort of semi-memorized in your head of this is what I'm going to say. And you do that ahead planning before you go back to school, rather than stuttering your way through something and getting, horrified by what you just said, to practice something and then decide very thoughtfully, well, if I said this, then maybe this would happen, but I don't think I want people. So some kids will just go back and say, I needed to go to the hospital. I was having a medical problem. And that's it. And they don't say anything further. Some kids feel very comfortable saying, I was struggling with depression and I had to go to a psychiatric hospital and I felt like I was going to hurt myself, and they'll tell the whole story. And so it really depends. I think a thoughtful discussion as a family, maybe the parents and the teen, this is what we're going to say, bring in the therapist if you have one, and then have that meeting with school and decide what is it going to look like. Because I'm a strong believer that you should transition back into things for certain kids, as opposed to just jump in head on and say, okay, everything's going to be fine.
That's great.
That sounds,
Maybe that's really great. I would say maybe when you might go through the scenarios with your child, to sort of have them think through how they might feel if various things happen in the school setting too.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic advice. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think depending on the child, I think it would have to be tailored. And I like the idea of a script. I think, if you're anxious to go into something, sometimes just preparing for it kind of helps cut down. So that's great advice. Thank you very much. Let me just check the chat, see if we have anything else coming through. Nothing jumping out, but I wanted to just ask, oh, actually I do see something. We have a question about recognizing signs of an eating disorder. I know we've talked a little bit about anxiety and depression, but this would be any warning signs that parents should be looking for?
Yeah, usually, when parents come to us and there's a concern about an eating disorder, at least I've had parents call me before they come to me so that, I can approach the subject. It's a very sensitive topic for children or teenagers going through that issue. So the way you go is you can start, we ask them like for an intake, you do the weight, their height, and then you see what kind of, there's a weight loss, there's a sudden weight gain, and what are they doing? Are they is it an avoidance over there that they don't want to eat? Is it a self-image? And there, I think Alan said about social media comes in a little bit there, because, all this posting of things on social media plays a big role in eating disorders these days. In the last few years that I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. So any change in their habits of eating, eating and going straight off to the restroom. I mean, as mothers, we keep an eye on a lot of things, what snack did they pick up? What are they eating? What are they buying? Things like that. So is there something like purging, or are they, throwing up? Are they, are they looking at anorexia, or is it binge eating going on, which goes along with the depression and anxiety? So any change in habits that you can see, you talk to them, get an intake of theirs, how their day is on their meals. And if they see, and if we are seeing any significant weight loss or weight gain, those are things to think about also. That there could be, a part of, something is going on, there's an eating disorder, or something is bothering them about their self-image at that time. So there are certain, questions as general pediatricians in our, well checkups, or when parents specifically bring them for this issue, we go through all these and talk to them about this. So any change in diet, they change in their habits, those are very important things to look at. And of course, then, probably you guys, Haniya must be seeing some, the cases who get referred to you who really do have the eating disorders, So how would you take it from there? We do a baseline blood work also just to make sure that the parameters are okay and we're not missing out on anything organic at that time, look at the thyroid and all, get a comprehensive, make sure the blood work is okay. And then, of course, if need be, refer them for, further evaluations. Yeah, so I don't know if Dr. Raza, she has something to add on this.
Yeah, I would say exactly that. Eating behaviors are very tricky. And so in order, eating disorders in psychiatry, we have these sort of very well-defined patterns, like you have to have a certain number of certain eating type behaviors or behaviors related to food, related to trying extreme efforts to try to lose weight, etc. And so there are these very carefully characterized symptoms, and so that would see if you would meet criteria for eating disorder. And then we have this thing of disordered eating, which is a little different. You might not meet full criteria for anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder, which are these sort of characterized conditions, but you might have a very unhealthy relationship with food. I do think, and it's true for boys and girls, this the current, I think all of us know this, the current ideal of what is considered an attractive body typically across the board is someone who's thin, for boys as well. Boys are also going to great efforts and lengths to remain slim, to be, whatever it is that they're trying to achieve, cut, muscular, whatever, but yet skinny. And so we see kids, what would the signs be? I would say kids do lots of tricks with, and we refer to this as sort of maladaptive behaviors. And so you just want to keep track of the kinds of foods they're eating. Sometimes when you buy your groceries and you start seeing a pileup of snacks, which maybe a couple years ago they would have devoured them, and now those snacks are not being eaten, and they're starting to eat lettuce a lot and vegetables. And so you just want to keep track. Some of it is actually good, healthy eating, and they just want to eat clean. It's very much the fashion, and it's good for your body to eat clean. So it's really just kind of being a detective and keeping an eye out for what are the food choices they're eating? Are they skipping meals? Are they not coming to dinner? I would like to really make a plug for having dinner together as a family, even if you can do it one night a week. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, but I think the returns are huge to do that. To just sort of sit together, whatever the family unit is, for everyone to be present at the same time. And you could have a rule, no devices. I find with my husband, I have to constantly say to him, you cannot have your phone at the table. But sometimes if you have meals together, you can just kind of see the eating pattern. So kids may be skipping meals if you do tend to have meals together. It's hard to know what they're eating at school, but frequently talking about the way their body looks and just taking great measures of wanting to lose weight. Another maladaptive eating behavior would be eating large quantities of food and then disappearing. So sometimes kids do that. They have this impulsive need to eat a lot, and then they experience guilt, and then they have to, either vomit it out or do these kinds of things. So if you're concerned, talk to the pediatrician and just kind of keep a survey of the amount and quantity of food your kids are eating.
Eating disorders is one of the problem areas that we thought would be important to screen for. So in the behavioral health screen, the BHS, we ask questions and kids will answer them. And so we actually see in Pennsylvania data, 6% of the kids screening positive for potential eating disorder. But that's 6% of what we call an indicated population, where someone's concerned about the kid in general, not just every kid, but that's still quite a lot of kids. So if you ask them the questions, they will answer. And so that's one way to do it. To me, meals together is so important, hard to do with our modern society, or maybe postmodern or something. But actually, if you can work with your kids to prepare the meal together, dinner, that's even better, right? That would be just an awesome way to spend time preparing food and having the dinner together. So.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I wish I could get my boys in the kitchen to help me with the meal, but at least they'll sit down and eat, which is good. Okay, I'm just checking the chat to see if we have any more questions. We have about maybe another 5 to 10 minutes. So if parents, if you have any pressing questions you want to ask our expert panelists, please put it in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask. I guess because we do have experts here who have worked with kids with developmental disabilities and special needs, I just want to ask, like, our teenagers who have developmental issues or special needs, are they facing, and they likely face additional challenges during the pandemic, right? And so I'm just wondering, are there any strategies that you might be able to suggest for parents to adopt to keep even closer eye for warning signs about this, like for anxiety, depression in kids with other issues that Haniya, can I direct that to you?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So I work with a lot of kids who have neurodevelopmental issues, including learning differences. Autism spectrum disorders is a big one that I love seeing those kids. That's one of my passions. And you know what I tell parents, again, it's all about that transition. If we're going to talk about COVID and the amount of times these kids have had to transition and the amount of time the rug just gets pulled under and you don't quite know, are we going back to school? Are we not? And it's constantly happening at each school break, summer break, winter break, whatever. So I would say be patient. I did notice with a lot of my kids that transition back to school was really hard. And I found that sometimes parents were just so overwhelmed because they couldn't get their kids to go back to school. And we were seeing, this thing that we term school refusal, where kids, yes, they're refusing to go to school, but there's always something behind. Why are they refusing? It's frequently because there's a severe anxiety about the unknown and having to transition back when they've set up a routine that they've been following for 8 or 9 months. And now we're just telling them, okay, now that's done. Now you have to go back. Right. So just to be patient. I even told parents, and for some of the kids that I work with, it took 6 months for the real, for it to become fluid and easy and part of the routine to go back to school. I mean, I'm giving examples of maybe more extreme cases, but just be patient and give them time and understand that it is really hard for them. I mean, we're seeing it in adults. I know it's a big thing that we talk about at the NIH, is this whole idea of when are people going back to work? If we're going back to work, can we still telework? A lot of people actually like teleworking and want to stick with it. They don't have no interest in going into morning commutes and things like that. But the kids don't have that choice and that luxury that we have, where we can have some sort of a hybrid system. The kids, for now, they're all back to school. So just to be patient with them and understand that sometimes it takes along the order of months for them to get back in the swing of it and feel like they belong again. So it's not weeks, it's not days, it's not like, oh, they'll be fine through September and by October they'll be ready to go. Not so much. It takes months to really, particularly our kids with neurodevelopmental differences, to adjust back into things.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Kind of maybe ask a final question, and this is more kind of looking forward and hoping for a normal life, but in the same vein, like trying to figure out a way to put in perspective things for our kids that they've missed out on birthday celebrations. Like a 16-year-old has spent an 1/8 of their life in pandemic, so it's not trivial. It may, in the grand scheme of things will normalize eventually and things may fall into place. But how can we bolster our youth to take this kind of thing in stride? I know it's not easy, but like, is there, putting it in perspective, they missed out on a family trip. They didn't have a birthday celebration, homecoming was affected, things like that. So things that matter to them, how do we help them kind of, not to say that it's okay they missed it, but like what are strategies for parents to deal with this? And that's kind of like, advice to take home for us, essentially.
Yeah, to me, it's, well, go ahead. Yeah.
No, carry on. That's okay.
Human history is full of major disasters and trauma, and we all survive somehow, but we end up repeating the same things more than once. For example, World War I and then World War II, right? Yeah. I mean, just in my opinion, this mass insanity of human behavior. So, we're obviously in a really fraught situation in the planet today, and kids see it. I mean, they're just, how could they not, right?
Yeah.
And all the rhetoric. So I think it's so important. Of course, I am very optimistic, but it doesn't mean bad things won't happen. And we're, in fact, all of us are mortal. At some point, we will die. You have to deal with that. But this is reality, right? So I think there's lots of evidence from studies as well as just kind of philosophy. And we should talk about these things, and this is just what each person experiences, each kid experiences. There's a great study in the UK. I love it. They did a randomized study and taught the first graders that were lucky to philosophy concepts. And they staged the vocabulary appropriately, but they got the concepts across to the kids and sort of showed them and educated them and really just for practice how to talk to each other logically, how to have an argument and not get angry, but think through what was known and the logic of it. So those kids that were lucky enough to get that intervention, 2 years later, they're doing better in math and English. And to me, it's like kind of underscores that if you can help kids make sense of the world, make meaning of the world, they'll run with it. They'll figure things out, right? That's kind of the autonomy part of the equation. So we all have things to learn. And so it becomes like, you can learn from your kids too, but that conversation, let's try to figure out the world, what's going on. And I would say uncertainty and contradiction and unknowns are just part of reality. You can't get around it, right? Some people, we don't like uncertainty, we want certainty, but that's just not actually realistic. So we have to, should we ignore it, kind of suppress it, or try to make it an open part of what we talk about and experience, and we work with it. So all these concepts to me, and this is how our brains work. That from a neuroscience perspective, there's so much that we can do to make our kids stronger mentally. And again, it's also starts with ourselves. And I'm so happy to see that schools are doing this now, right? I don't know Wootton specifically, but a lot of schools are teaching kids neuroscience, brain function concepts, as well as social emotional stuff, how to get along with themselves and their peers, how to recognize bullying in the classroom and not participate, maybe help, how to, if you see a kid sitting in the corner, maybe a new kid just moved there, go and make friends. All these things are happening, but they're still not kind of like everywhere, right? There's still a lot of variation, what happens. So I think that's the opportunity. And that's where social media can really help, actually, to help find ways to understand things better.
I would add to that, I think that was, I agree with all of that, was really excellent comments. I would say some other things, this idea of helping kids to have open conversations about what's going on within the household. And the other thing too is to try to have them get involved in community engagement. I mean, I think this is a really powerful time to for kids to move from the passive stance and talking about themselves and their experience and how terrible everything is maybe to move outward and take the more active stance of going out and being engaged with their community. So I think kids, particularly at this age group, these 9th through 12th graders, they like to be helpful and they like to be given tasks that are that they can follow and then have a nice immediate reward product at the end. So any kind of community engagement activities that you guys can organize as a school, clubs, I'm sure that's already happening. I can't imagine that Wootton is not, the students aren't sort of banding together to do these kinds of meaningful activities, because there's a sense of positivity, self-efficacy, and just feeling proud of yourself that you gave to the other. I think that's so healthy and important for this age group to do in a sincere way, in a way that's meaningful to them, and to just think creatively and think about coming up with ways to be active in the county, in Montgomery County, and helping the other. I think it's really important to be part of a community. I feel that that's something that, as we go generations and generations, that sense of community sometimes gets lost. And so helping kids identify what are different communities that they can be a part of. So sometimes people come from really big families. I feel like those are the lucky people, where you have lots of aunts and uncles and cousins. And so you're part of your family community. That's like a really good blessing. Church community, mosques, temples, wherever you have that kind of a community sense, I think that can also be very helpful in situations that we find ourselves in. Your school community is also a really big community. And maybe if there could be peer groups or different ways where people can interact and communicate with one another, I think these are all really, really helpful for kids as they sort of wrap up their high school years and move on to the next thing. And so academics are really important, but these other sort of life concepts are also really, really important. And so it involves sort of thinking with a broader eyes, so to speak, less into your immediate condition and what's happening in here with me, and maybe just spanning out a little bit and seeing where you fit into the different communities and how you can be a positive influence.
So that brings the perspective that I think we're all in it together, and it's like we'll make it. We'll be fine. Okay, that's really good. That's really good to hear, and some really good tips there for parents. I think we're kind of getting to the end of the hour, and if there's any other comments that any of the panelists want to make, now's any parting shots, any parting advice. I do have one very practical question from a member of the audience who I think has been very impressed with the panel today and is wondering if you all are taking patients. Dr. Raza, are you taking patients?
I'm not taking patients right now. I'm completely swamped, but I would be happy to, I think these kinds of conversations are really important. I think people who are attending today, obviously, you care about your school, you care about being involved. So I think, and you clearly care about your kids. So to be involved in the school that your kids go to and spend an evening in a meeting like this, it just speaks to, I think a subset of really dedicated parents. So I would be happy to, come back and talk in groups again.
Okay, that's great.
Specific questions.
Okay, we might take you up on it. That would be wonderful. And also, just as we mentioned, there might be a shortage for finding help in terms of psychiatrists and counselors and therapists and things. Are there any particular resources out there that will help us find appropriate care? I mean, outside of talking to the pediatrician, who often will give you a list of recommended people, but they may all be full. Like, are there any kind of, I guess I'm thinking of like a marketplace, for example, where you might find.
I don't think there's
dealing
a major,
with certain kinds of issues. And
I don't know, but it's just not enough people that are trained, and work in these fields. But on the other hand, it's like, where do you set the threshold? And again, broader kinds of things, groups in the school, talking more at home earlier, is really going to benefit kids. And there are lots of people, companies, working, and they already have some things, I think, on the market to use artificial intelligence kind of things to provide online counseling, support, therapy, and all kinds of smart attempts to combine that with a person. So there's a human being, but also this AI. So there's a lot out there. It's hard to keep track of it all. But if you look around, but I would say it starts, I agree totally with the parents, family, the community, the school. And the schools are really kind of the hub of the community, actually. So that's the place to, I think, focus on the most.
Okay.
And back to the jargon, the MTSS, right? Multi-tier system of support. So tier 2 is kind of like having a group in the school setting, like a group focuses on anxiety or bullying or depression or other issues. And that's where, you know, myself and others as professionals, we could probably can contribute to that. Just having knowledge and experience with some of these topics, but it's not the same thing as providing, you know, professional services directly. So.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, I really want to thank you all. Thank you, the three of you, for really, first of all, taking a full hour or more out of your evening with your own families. So thank you, and thank you for providing the unique perspectives and the advice to all parents. I've definitely benefited from this discussion, and I'm sure other parents have too. So thank you again, Dr. Jagani, Dr. Tian, and Dr. Raza. Thank you for joining us today. And I'll hand this over to Brian. Brian, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. And thank you all so much, all four of you. We really appreciate it. It was an excellent conversation, and I think we all learned quite a lot. I think guidance counselors in schools are a good resource. So, you know, that's a really great place to, you know, if your child needs some support in school, that's a really great place to go. And, you know, school counselors are trained and can provide that support. And we can maybe talk more about that down the road. But thank you all very much. For those who are you know, we hope that you can participate in the coffee chat with Ms. Bolden on Friday at 9 a.m. And we look forward to seeing you next month, March 15th, where we have an excellent presentation on college. So thank you all for joining this evening, and I hope everyone has a really pleasant evening. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good night.